Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So today we have a special episode on trauma and COVID, the interaction of the craziness of the world we're in now and the craziness we carry with us in our bodies from the past. So I have three global experts from different parts of the world. We have Ilan Stephani, says Carly's Kiss, that's her brand. She's an expert in intimacy, trauma worker, wrote a book about her time as a sex worker. It's someone whose work I value extremely highly and is always actually a lot of fun. Might not sound like it around trauma, but super fun. Your screen seems to have frozen, Ilan, so I hope we get you back in a minute. No. You were just super zen and still. Oh my God. I actually thought you'd frozen. That was like so still.
That's how trauma healing works.
Let me do the introductions. Magdalena Weinstein. So Magdalena is someone who's I like from the conference, her work on trauma, wide-ranging. Her memes are particularly good for those who want a sort of clear explanation of trauma in a visual form. She runs a podcast, and Ilan, I forgot to say, is from Germany. Magdalena is from Chile. So we have already a cross-cultural piece. Steve is from the United States. Steve Hoskinson, founder of Organic Intelligence. You may have heard the podcast episode where me and him were chatting about trauma on that. Lots and lots of good stuff to say around trauma. So, hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Why don't we just do like a quick check-in before we kind of go into it? Just like in a sentence or two, how are you today? And we'll do that order I introduced you in.
I love the training that COVID puts me into of truly swimming through the utter craziness by using my tools in being introduced to my inner craziness. So at the moment I feel very rich and I feel very blessed. I also now have some kind of output, co-creation with the four of us, and at the same time getting to know more about you. So trauma makes me light up. It's the end of small talk, so I'm happy to be here.
End of small talk, the death of small talk. Maybe that'll be the podcast episode's title. Magdalena, how you doing?
I had a good morning, but it's been like that. It's been the end of something and the beginning of something else. And those transitions I'm familiar with, coming from a country very chaotic. So I think like you, Mark, I thrive in a way in chaos. So I'm being more busy and fight, flight, maybe more in between socializing and getting things done, driven, very driven. So I'm trying to temper that drivenness just so that I can come back and be here more. This is what I do try all day to temper this driven activation. Yeah. But I'm happy to be here with all of you. Feels sweet, and also that wilderness at the same time, those flavors.
It does, doesn't it? I saw this in my diary today. It was a really busy day. I saw this in my diary and thought, that'll be nice talking to those guys. Paul Linden may crash in and join us at some point as well, by the way. Steve, how are you doing today?
Great. Doing really well. I'm super excited also to be joining you, Magdalena and Carly, Ilan, and just to savor this fellowship, to savor this connection. I know that we are all into the embodiment field, into the appreciation of the value of movement and the wisdom of the body. So I'm really cherishing actually this opportunity to connect with you. And I think that having been likewise also super busy in getting our programs out, it's just such a respite to be able to be with you and to join together in these conversations. And I like the sense of aliveness and this edginess. Like there's this edge between too much and just right, the sweet spot of excitement and navigating that. And I'm really enjoying hearing how each of you is doing that. And that's a support for me. And so I just as a last reflection, to be with people who are really doing that process of using the moment and seeing the moment as our teacher, and to continue our own personal evolution as the main process. We're teachers because we need to hear what we're saying.
Hey, thank you. So for listeners, just to place this is Wednesday, the 29th of April. So in Britain, we're on lockdown, but the curve's flattening. Very looks that way, which is, thank God. Europe, a few things are starting to open up in some European countries. I spoke to a friend in Norway, people going back to school, a few softenings of some of the lockdown. And in the US, things are still pretty rough by the looks of things. So just to kind of say that we're in, different places here. Some of you may have heard the plague dialogues, which were the three panels we did right at the beginning, fairly near sort of COVID beginning, and that was super interesting. We talked about the fight-flight response, the grief curve, and it seems like we're in a different place from the beginning. There was this initial shock, and people had that response, and then sometimes after that there was maybe denial, then shock, but then a sort of exhaustion crash for people, and now some sort of a new normal, they call it in England, some sort of leveling out. What do people think about that kind of curve that we've been going through this a few weeks now? I think we're on week 5 or 6 in the UK of lockdown. So what do people think of that? What's your sense of that curve that we've all been going through? Anyone at all?
I agree to this term of new normal, and at the same time, I somehow miss all of us being all over the place that was given to the situation when it was very new. Like now everybody has some kind of opinion and getting through the all-day routine, and I resonate so much with what you said, Steve, around this. It's too much. No, it's the sweet point. Ooh, I have to push my limits. And it's like, I do not want this era of the sweet spots nonstop to end. And it's like, I almost grieve for the loss of this kind of everybody is thrown into the ocean of not knowing. Because I think what we tap into when we become intimate with our own wounding and trauma is we do not know anything and we can't control anything. And I think the art of trauma healing might be in peace and be in trust with this not knowing. So to somehow, yes, the new normal, yes, something good and something not. Because I love fellows while needing to train to serve every day even better. So yeah, that's my sense for the state around.
Anyone else?
Yeah, that being thrown into the ocean of our not knowing, that's, for those of us that, we would say have good ego strength or have trained and have, whatever, genetic capacity, whatever, we are, Mark, we named this also, we're sort of braced, we're supported, we feel the vibrancy of this higher energy and can do that surfing. And for others, it is too much. People have lost jobs and lives and are in a massive pile of grief, and so also there. I mean, I don't think there's any cause for alarm. There is no new normal. Flattening the curve just means that the healthcare system won't be overwhelmed. But this is a highly contagious virus that is going to infect over the next 2 years. Epidemiologists say 40 to 70% of the population. It is much more lethal than the flu. They're finding out that young people have high risk of large vein strokes and so on. So really, there is no knowing in this except that it's not over. And in the States, we have this whole thing where people are rebelling, having what's called quarantine fatigue, and so people are losing their patience for caring for other people. And this is a tremendous problem because, as we know, this highly contagious pathogen can live silently in people and be shared with a contagion value that's well over what the flu is.
Maybe let's take a step back. Magdalena, if someone said to you, what's the connection between COVID and trauma? Like, why are you talking about these two things together on the same page? I don't get it. There's people that get traumatized, maybe something bad happens to them, they have a PTSD or something, and then there's this thing we're going through now. How are those two connected at all? Let's kind of almost take a step back here before we go into some of these rich areas that have opened up. What would you say, Magdalena, is the kind of basics here?
I was thinking about what you guys said. I've been getting a different flavor of clients now that in the last maybe 2-3 weeks, I've been getting more of those clients that have way more issues that were underneath, maybe lurking, but they weren't that visible. And then COVID, what it did, I think the fires did that in the United States a little bit, but COVID did something deeper. It just removed whatever eggshell layer they had to sustain their life. It removed it. And so now there's like no floor. That's what it feels like when I get these people, when I work with them, or when I get these emails or messages, please, I need help. It feels like a drowning in some ways for some people, where others are at the same time thriving in this. So it's like a gigantic wave, and some people know how to ride it, and others are drowning under. So it's really interesting how polarizing is becoming. I see the polarizing happening more and more with the weeks. That's what my take has been, looking back into it. Different countries also taking different stances. But yeah, I think a polarization is something that perhaps was there, but it wasn't as visible for everybody. Now is everybody noticing more often that polarization in the nervous system, but also in how we've been living, I think this goes deep and deep down the rabbit hole we can go.
So one thing we might see is people who have had past trauma having a less ability to cope, or, sort of a triggering of that, or their social support's been removed. So all of a sudden symptoms may worsen because they've been soothing, co-regulating, and that's not possible now if they're on their own. But we're also seeing people that have had traumatic backgrounds either cope well with it. They've had that post-traumatic growth where they're like, okay, I'm used to tough shit. Okay, this is your first rodeo? Really? It's not mine. And even, and I definitely had this response initially, a certain enjoyment of the intensity. They're like, okay, my nervous system's made for emergencies, motherfuckers. Like, I'm good to go. Like, I don't know, you soft people are catching up. Let me show you how to do this, Like, I stepped into a leadership role very early because I was just like, I can handle this, There's a comfort there, maybe even, or an excitement. So we've got this range from, oh my God, it's redoing old trauma and that's a nightmare, through to, I'm coping, but it's making it harder to cope, through to actually, I was made for this shit. So any thoughts on either of those?
I was experiencing the same. I think in myself, this kind of, I love intensity, instead of, oh no, I'm hypersensitive, I'm already traumatized, please stay away. It's like, let's dive into the challenge. We will die anyway. So there is something of the gift of trauma, is this deep intimacy with the own death. And by that, somebody knowing I'm wounded is somebody who already stops running from their own death. And this is such a big leap when it comes to facing life and wanting to be alive at all costs. And I think then by somatic trauma therapy being introduced to the own nervous system, being designed in crisis and designed for caring for also the others, is such a gift to the society around. And there is something of our challenge also. How do we still care for each other, even in a touching way, when we are not allowed to touch each other? And this is, I think, one of the challenges that it's such a pleasure to contribute to this research, because we have to do it and we have to hack how to do it. So I'm thrilled about this as one fragment of the challenges that are now given to us.
Mm. I'm hearing so much about bridging, Ilan, the polarities that Magdalena was suggesting, and wow, you're speaking in poetry just now. I just keep going. I'm going to sit here and just listen to that. That's fantastic. Although, Mark, I appreciate the F-bombs. Everyone.
No, we've got a beautiful and complimentary style, Ilan and myself. She speaks this beautiful poetry, and I lay it down like some kind of British rapper or something. So
right. Right. Well, and, yeah. And and the thing that I would say to all of that also is that we're seeing this in dream disturbance also. Sleep disturbance, dream disturbance. People are having dreams of the deep and these existential questions of mortality and existential points and being overwhelmed and so on. It's showing up in people's dreams, and it's very interesting that way, and facing ultimate questions of what life really is about.
Steve, your Aikido sensei, Chiba sensei, was in my dream 2 nights ago. I visited his dojo. You just remind me. But let's not analyze my dreams in front of thousands of people. So,
let's.
Do you want to go there? What does it mean that Mark visited the dojo of Chiba sensei? It's a German accent to analyze me for this, I think. Dream disturbance is interesting. How would that play out then in terms of because reality's got a bit dreamlike, and there was definitely this period where it was very liminal and weird, and it was just like this not knowing, and now it's sort of stabilized again, because that's what reality does, right? It goes, whoa! It gets very thin in the pagan model of the space between us and the underworld is closer because we're close to death and there's a change happening. And then that thinness goes again. It becomes a bit more stable. Like, okay, going to Tesco's, put on my mask, put on my gloves. Even though it's sort of surreal, it becomes, okay, this is my daily life now. So yeah, I'm curious about that connection to dreams with this.
Well, and the daily dreaming too. I think all of us are probably familiar and working with the fight, flight, and freeze, and the freeze system and how it is related to dissociation and that sense of that thinness happening, like the line between so-called normal reality and other dimensions becomes more thin. And in that way, this notion, Magdalena, you named it well, like this drowning. People are literally drowning, and that means low oxygenation, hypoxia. And that freeze state is a hypoxic state. It's a low oxygen state. So people's systems are being triggered into these dorsal vagal states, and they are then having to confront that question of mortality and dream-like states. Dissociation is going to be triggered. But also I would suspect as well, this is a little side tangent, there would be things around panic and anxiety, because panic and anxiety are hypoxia-related processes.
Interesting. And I'm well again after sort of 2 months of COVID-related symptoms, and I was measuring my blood oxygenation. We have a little device for that clips on your finger, and I was at 96%, which is like the same as an elderly person through most of that period for a period of some weeks. And even afterwards, I still had it. When I didn't have symptoms, I was low oxygenation. I wondered if there was a slight shutdown, almost culturally, like almost in the air as a shutdown. You know what I mean? Like there's that mild freeze that might, I've just got a lot of colleagues who are just really tired. That's another thing I've been seeing, just this, and that's partly Zoom fatigue. I don't think it is Zoom though, because I can do a call like this with you guys and I'm like super alive, super vibrant. I'm, learning, I'm connecting. There's a social engagement going on. They're saying it's Zoom fatigue, or they're saying I'm spending too much time online, but I think it's something else, this sort of heaviness or sleepiness.
I was thinking about what, Steve, you were saying about the piece of the nervous system in freeze. And I was thinking also about the disorganization that's happening outside of the system, because used to be, I don't know, we felt like the earth was organized in a way. It was all functioning well. We could control viruses because we've been 100 years without them. And suddenly we get this disorganization from our parental figure, maternal figure of the earth. To me, I've been really feeling into that maybe shamanic or transpersonal piece of what happens when our container is starting to reveal this disorganization around us. What happens to us that we bond all the time with the earth? So like that's the first piece of the connection. What happens when that is starting to fall apart? So I've been really interested in that, and it feels like that's coming in a way dream-like, transpersonally. Well, we haven't been bonding with the earth, therefore now the relationship is very disorganized. And in disorganized relationships, we have freeze and then fight, flight, and then back and forth in between them. And I feel that we go into freeze, collectively, and then we go into fight flight. Right now, more often, it's just seen more. It's more visible. I've seen that in Chile a lot because Chile had this disorganized environment all the time for that many years. So it was creating this fight flight and then freeze all the time. So now I'm seeing it more globally. What was happening in one country or many little countries, it's happening all over the world, versus Europe and United States or Canada didn't have that. Maybe you guys didn't have that perspective as much strong as somebody in the Middle East or, Eastern Europe or South America.
Do you think some cultural trauma could come out here? Because Southern Europe immediately became a kind of fascist state again. Maybe for good reason, but clearly, people, Spanish police on the streets fining people for, having the wrong shopping and things like this. Germany too, to some extent. And other cultural patterns, like other culture, America did its rebel against the crown thing. It's basically a sort of Boston Tea Party thing happening right now in the States, right? With a lot of rebelling against authority, which is in the American history of rebelling against the British, of course. And again, we could say that's a positive thing, tyrannical governments, or we could say it's a negative thing, it's kind of teenage looking. Have countries responded according to some of their historical trauma or even just historical patterns? That is a question I have.
I mean, for sure. I would even put it a step further that, let's say for the moment, what we have been calling trauma, or then the virus or the disorganization that is now happening, is such a superficial stuff compared to what was waiting for us, inside of us, since a few thousand years in the species. So even us saying, now the German cultural trauma comes up, I could say that's deep. I want to call it superficial. We are not going, due to COVID, into shutdown or resignation or fear of death or freeze or fight or flight. We are just making more visible to ourselves and all those around that our whole species is built on that. And to be honest, traumatized people like, for example, me, we know that the earth is not a safe container. And that humans are not the safe container that we are so welcome to heal in, because nobody knows how to provide 100% safety. And the world, our human world, was so disorganized before. It's like, for me, coming from this wounded place, I'm so grateful for not longer having to apologize as an alien. Because everybody is in trouble. And I'm like, welcome to my world. And like post-traumatic growth, I would love all of us in all of our woundings taking pride in having the insight of the global mess, instead of trying to overcome it as an inner problem. It's not. So let's say it's a collective species trauma problem that is not drawn to the surface of our consciousness. What a gifting time. At least dying with open eyes. Wow.
There's such a relief, isn't there, in having the veil of delusion pulled back so that we can actually begin to see and face and cope and be in reality a little bit more and not be so isolated with it. Like, we now see what we're facing, and it's been there all along.
Right, but I wanted to believe that death wasn't going to come for me. And I wanted to believe that I couldn't get ill and die. And the elderly weren't vulnerable. And, nothing's changed in some ways, right? I did a post about this in the early days of it, saying, look, guys, nothing has actually changed. Just the sort of Buddhist realities of suffering and old age, disease and death are just more in our face. And in some ways, this is the normal situation, right? If we think of how long have human beings been around in roughly the same form, 30,000 years, something like that. Most of that time, we were at risk of dying of disease continuously. Like, we would be old. There's different evidence on this for tribal peoples, but 40 is kind of old for a lot of tribal peoples. Not all, but a lot. So this, in a way, it's like, this is our wiring. This is what we're designed for. And as you say, that comes with gifts. I don't want to overstate that for people who are really suffering, or people who have their past trauma triggered, or they can't cope with their anxiety. But there's definitely sort of gifts within that reality.
Yeah.
Right, and presumably prior cultures, ancient life ways would have quite a different perspective on the elders as well. There was frequently and real care and honoring and veneration of the elders and the ancestors. And I don't know how it is where you are, but we're in some ways warehousing people in assisted living or nursing homes, and you see the corpses being rolled out from there as if they are being the places where death is yet to visit. So I'm also deeply concerned about our ability to care for those that are most vulnerable and to sense the commonality of the human family so that we take the right precautions, continue social distancing, and really express our care for those that are most vulnerable.
So quick interruption to let you know about some of the stuff we're doing outside the podcast. So the Embodied Facilitator Course and the Foundations of Embodiment certification, they're now running, so you can't get on those until next year. This year, if you're a yoga teacher, you can get on the Embodiment Body Yoga Principles online teacher training, which is EYP.training. And the main one I would say is to go to embodiedfacilitator.com and get on our newsletter list. Then you'll hear about all the free events we do. We do free events regularly, certain free ebooks. The podcast itself is there, all the videos, all the stuff we do related to the content on the show. If you want, as I said, ebooks, books, free trainings, we do things regularly on marketing, on trauma, on facilitation generally. That's all there. So go to embodiedfacilitator.com and have a look around there and get on the newsletter list so you hear about the different trainings and things we have happening. Thank you, and back to the show. So let's look into this sort of rebelling against social distancing. And, for me, there's a grain of something wise in that. Like, it was accepted very readily in an almost childlike way. This childlike, yes, daddy, tell me what to do to keep safe, And then now we sort of evolved from children into teenagers almost. There's this rebelling going on, which may be very unwise, or it may have some, utility to it. Like, hey, is that rule actually necessary? Let's look at the economic thing as well as the social, as well as, and it strikes me that our parental relationships could come out very strongly now that we've got this kind of motherly healthcare thing, which is a really big deal. Like, the NHS will look after us. People are practically calling the NHS mummy, and the government have become daddy, right? They're like, daddy says you can't leave your house. And then some people are sort of super obedient, which I'd say is one trauma pattern, right? Be the good girl who doesn't get hit by doing everything daddy says, or the opposite, be the Irish rebel. This is cultural for me of, fuck it, I'll do what I want and I'm doing what dad says, it's like there's that kind of side to me that's in my system. So any thoughts on sort of how parental stuff is kind of playing out here? So we've got a bunch of therapists in one room. We have to talk about mum and dad.
There is no connection to your early childhood going on.
Did you see what I'm saying about the analogy of like the healthcare system being mummy and the government being daddy, and these quite childlike, and now we're seeing, particularly in the US, like almost teenage type responses to that?
I've seen the US being constantly in a fawning, appeasing behavior. I don't know if it's like a British, you, Mark, might know better than me about that. Like, oh, let's carry on, let's keep going, let's pretend, let's build this white picket fence house, and then let's create this artificial dream that we are safe, we never die. And it seems like it's this abandonment of culture. There is no culture here. I have never seen culture here, like the death of culture in the United States. And so let's build something. And so let's adopt some mom and dad, like you're saying. But actually there's no relationship with them because they're originally not my mother and not my father. So now we're starting to see, let's put a precedent, put somebody that represents what we really think about, because we've been really appeasing and funny. We've been pretending that this was a relationship actually. So I see that really present. I don't know, Stephen, if you see that in the United States, but really present more like this very disconnected relationship with this parental piece, and in a way now it's starting to fall apart, and people are rebelling also here, dividing in between, believing this. Yeah, the split, believing the system, the health system is working, and then the other piece that is also very big in Europe, that is all fake news. It's all it's not real. They're trying to create this new world order underneath. So, and I see that as a response to the fawning or to the false window that was created here. I always seen this. Maybe because I live in California also, the false window is more often seen here. I don't know if you have any sharing about that, but...
I wonder if how common that perspective is. You know, like we're talking as sort of as privileged folks, and I don't imagine that in the U.S., for instance, people of color have ever mistaken the government as being their parents. You know, this is clearly somebody else's idea. You know, these are the folks that would just prefer that we were slaves again. So I'm not sure that perspective is going to be holding, and also the perspective, Mark, that you were talking about is really around an authoritarian parenting style as opposed to an attachment parenting style, and so you know, I think that's pretty unique for the common period. I'm not seeing evidence. I'm curious if that more authoritarian parenting style was part of our ancient life ways.
You mean instead of bonding? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mark, I was just saying, I'm not sure that, like, for instance, in the United States, that people of color would ever confuse the government with being parental figures.
Well, it's definitely, you know, as I said, the Irish also wouldn't, right? Like, to us, it's government as oppressor, government as rules unfairly enforced by people who have taken control. But, you know, there's definitely groups that, would respond differently to that. But again, that just leads to a different pattern, right? So there's some sort of modeling of relationship to authority which can be trauma influenced, whatever that is, and patterns of culture and subculture for sure.
I really see that just as an expression of the default phase of fight or flight or freeze. You know, how people are configured that way.
Mm-hmm. So we saw an initial flight, and then maybe a bit of a fight mobilization is coming in for some people. You can't shoot a virus, unfortunately. I think that's America's biggest problem with this. It's very difficult to shoot a virus. But
that apparently was unknown, because everybody went out and they bought guns when the virus appeared.
That's when everyone turns on each other for the zombie apocalypse.
Gun and toilet paper.
Yeah, and the toilet. Oh, so we could analyze the psychology of toilet paper for a long time, but I think we're past that point. Oh, anything anyone wants to say more about panic or touch? So we've talked about your phrase, the gifts of trauma, Ilan, earlier, which I thought was a stunning phrase and very provocative and interesting. People also mentioned touch in passing. We're living in a low touch culture now. You know, and you know, certainly some cultures that's more typical than others. But my hug quotient has gone right down, and the idea of panic, you know, panic buying. I've identified panic selling in some people as well. Other kind of panicked behaviours. So, anyone got anything to say on any of those?
So, when I was introduced to this social distancing, was immediately concerned about the deprivation of touch, because we already come from a starving culture and starved culture on touch. And at the same time, it's not only that we cannot access safe touch, but we also might tap into touch is meant to be safe. Touch is such an accelerator for trauma healing, and now we are not allowed to touch each other. And underneath, touch is such a traumatized and such a charged thing. Like, just by me wanting to hug you in a safe way doesn't mean at all that I won't violate your boundaries, or that I won't give you the experience of your boundaries being violated. And social distancing, by locking every family down in the own cell also means many people cannot escape from horrifically unsafe touch. The amount of domestic violence increasing to something like 300% just by lockdown. How many children are now enduring without anybody even being allowed to interfere in the school system, even sexual abuse on an even more daily basis. There are things in the background going on where we can't talk about touch would be good and not touch is bad. And I think all of this, even in this horrific amount of concrete suffering, has to raise our awareness for where has touch gone with us, or where have we gone with touch all those decades and centuries ago? Because like us making touch a safe space again, wow, what a global big leap around healing and caring for each other.
We identified in one of the previous conversations that touch has now become considered. So the sense of people's boundaries has been quite reinforced. You know, like, hey, 2 meters, don't come near me, mate. You know, and there's some positives potentially in that as well. People becoming aware of kind of boundaries, boundary violations. But as you say, other people are in situations which really isn't good now. And worth considering.
You know, and in the thing that we do know also is that our states, our inner states, can be evoked through memory, through dreams. You know, Milton Erickson would always say, and the food that I eat in dreams is real. A couple of nights ago, you saw Chiba Shihan, and hopefully, you know, he was showing you Nikyo as he did once to me in a very memorable fashion. I have a body memory.
That's a wrist lock for people who are listening.
and so the recollection of these states of being touched are just as close as the next dream or the next guided imagery or the recall, you know, that we don't actually have to have real touch. In the meantime, we can also have conditions in which my state of being touched in the just the right fashion is available. And all of you that are panelists, we could create guided experiences where those states are evoked. A really important consideration.
What about irritability? When I saw big adrenal spike, crash and exhaustion, and then what I've seen a lot over the last couple of weeks is like a low-level irritability. I saw this with the colleague I was talking to earlier. I was just a bit less patient than normal, you know. This is part of that feeling of being constrained a little bit in the body, you know, like, oh, I can't go where I want to go, and it coming out not as, you know, abuse in my case or anything like that, but just as a kind of irritability. Have you seen this?
Believe it or not, I was just reading. I hate to admit this. I was just reading Freud, but Freud, following Fechner, was talking about how trauma means like energy that's not been discharged, and so the sense that you're being constrained and not being able to discharge this by motor action somehow is really key. Our usual pathways of behaving that kind of, you know, sort of burn off excess energy is being sort of stuffed down. And so I think that's a great way to begin to advocate also for continued movement practice in the midst of this.
Yes, it's interesting to me that I was irritable this morning and I hadn't left the house yesterday. I had a very full schedule, so I didn't have time to walk. And normally my average day, I'll do about 2 hours of walking around the park, and I find both the movement and the nature very helpful. And sometimes I do some barefoot walking. I mean, maybe as we go into the last sort of 15 minutes here, we could transition to practical stuff. So we've talked about this theoretically. So there's someone out there, they've got a trauma history. Maybe they're not coping so well with this, you know, doing the best they can, but, you know, they're struggling. You know, they've sort of turned on this podcast because they've gone, right, I've got trauma. Something's happening. I don't quite understand it right now, but it's not very nice. So what would be some practical tips from each of you for people out there?
I've been using a couple of things that are very effective. One of them is to find a place where you feel safe, where you feel also something in the environment feels pleasurable, because that can be something that feels like it has been taken away, pleasure, because the there's something about autonomy and decision making, and so I get to choose my pleasure, and that feels like there's a layer of that's gone. And somehow I don't get to choose what I don't get to choose to go to a restaurant, I don't get to choose to go to the beach, or I don't get to choose all that stuff. So finding something here where you are that feels pleasurable enough to interact with, and then start exteroceptively first my body with that object, and slowly building up to maybe touching it and interacting, touching that object, wherever it is. I have this stuffed animal right here with me. So,
I talk about tigers and tigers all day long. Thank you.
yeah.
Tiger. Hang on. Podcast listeners, non-YouTube listeners, Magdalena has just produced a cuddly toy tiger. Okay, so for our audio-only listeners, that's important I give the context here before you think Ilan started tripping hard or something. So,
and a lot of my clients start doing oscillations when they start relating in pleasurable ways, because they're trying to organize their brain is finding a rhythm. And I think finding rhythm again, that's another thing. And there's no one way that fits everybody in rhythm, but it could be a little faster rhythm. Like I'm starting to shake a little bit, bounce. Oh, that's maybe too much. I'm just going circularly side to side, finding this rhythm. And that's very soothing. And that's early bonding, early connection. I always go back to whatever was supposed to work first, just go there. Go to that first interaction. If it was going to be with your mom in her lap, doing this nice rhythmic bonding, do that. Let's go back to basics, I would say. It's time for basic, nothing fancy, no fancy tricks right now. Much more basic. I can go on, but I love anybody.
Cutest thing ever. Love it. And something felt very South American around that. The idea of kind of like rhythm. There's some of this Latin kind of flavor there for me from my travels. Ilan, any top tips or considerations, messages for people out there who may be suffering a little bit and go, what the hell are you guys on about? I just need some help, not your cleverness. The tiger stole the show now.
Flirting with me, with a tiger. That's happening. I want to add something fancy. Because like the main essential tool might be a 10-minute playlist of favorite songs that you can shake to twice a day without getting tired of listening to this music. I want all of us having the top evergreens of playlists and shaking, because shaking is such a basic medicine for our nervous system to discharge what hasn't been discharged so far, coming from your parents, coming from your culture, coming from COVID, or you being raped. No matter what, shake, like allow this vibrancy. And there is something in this trauma tool of shaking that allows our instincts to take over again. And then I would love us to somehow take pride in not getting along. Take pride in being a messy chaos, because at least the German trauma is everything has to be under control or something is off. And I would say, whoa, your life is really off if you really experience that you are in charge. This is built on a lot of dissociation and a lot of shutdown. And I would never want to exchange my tribe with a tribe that gets along. So take pride in your fear. It's like at least be alive at all costs. Shaking twice a day for 10 minutes. And another thing on the global and individual level, everybody wants to relax. 99% of what we call relaxation is shut down. I think that's not worth it. Do not try to relax. Try to volume even more up. Run towards the even more vibrant aliveness. And after this shaking and after this roaring and after this freaking out, you will have a good night of sleep maybe, and you are still a messy freak. And so am I. Can we cultivate pride in our wounding? Can we use this in order to introduce us to others and ourselves with our shadow first? Can we please stop with the small talk? All of us pay with the mask. All of us have gotten that it isn't worth this price. Let's stop it. That's my kind of survival skill. And this is not a survival skill. It is the paradise skill. But yes, we will enter into it because we are faced by death.
I think I actually love Ilan. So
yeah, right. How could you not? How could you not? And Magdalena as well with the tiger. With and I think I sent you, didn't I, the YouTube video of the dog who stole the dentures or something. That's to you. That's to me. That's you. It's like you're this rebel, but you actually just this cute little dog that stole some dentures. I'm loving the inclusiveness of all of this. I'm a messy freak too, and let's just make room for the shadow. Let's make room to be the messy freaks, and wake up the next morning. It's a new chance, and I'm loving the inclusion of all of that, and just the body's own way of soothing, if soothing is needed, or the shaking. And for sure, I'm totally getting that playlist down for sure. I would say that I would think of coping strategies in 3 phases based on how intense the challenge is. And so at the lower levels of intensity, we would suggest to just simply get the attention outside. Connect to the environment through the senses. So through seeing, hearing, and so on. And in low level challenge, I can do that. And I would practice that when I'm feeling well also, not just when it's hitting the fan, but when it's well. I would practice getting my senses and getting my biology responding to here and now by connecting to the environment through the senses. OI, we call it orientation. At the mid-range of intensity, at the next level of heightened intensity, then I would say to look for something more positive, to try to find something more positive, a positive state in image and sensation, in meaning, in affect. Try to find something that is more positive, jump on that state that feels better, and then from that state, hop back into orientation. Your best bet is to get to reality, and that's the portal to reality is orientation. You can get there by finding something more positive and then coming off of that positive into the orientation. If you hang out with the positive too long, it'll simply oscillate back to what's unpleasant, and then you're back in the same stew, and then you're really stuck in the back and forth. At the highest levels of intensity, when we're the freaky messes, then I think exactly what Ilan is saying. One is any port in a storm, just making room and accepting that. It's sackcloth and ashes, just going and somehow also reminding ourselves that this will pass. The highest intensity disorientation is from the freezy business, and the lie of the freezy business is it's always been like this, it's always going to be like this. And so if we can somehow remind ourselves that this will pass, yeah, it sucks right now, it's all gone to shit right now, and I'm a messy freak, and it won't be like this forever. And just that reminder may help us get through until it passes, because it will pass, and then I get back to orientation. And if I'm not in that high intensity state, fighting it, trying to make it different or something, then when it does shift out, I am more rested and I am resourced rather than just exhausted and beaten down from the fight that I just lost, basically.
One thing I find myself reminding a lot of people of right now is just saying, reassuring people hey, it's okay if you don't feel great right now. There is sometimes this illusion, particularly in the culture of hey, well, you've got yoga and you've got a meditation app, and yeah, you haven't had a hug in 5 weeks or seen any of your friends except online, but you're supposed to be fine because you can do an online workout or something, and just telling people hey, it's okay if you don't feel great. It's okay if you don't feel fine. And also, it's okay if you do. I've always seen almost guilt amongst people who are really thriving. And one thing I've really seen as well is if you are one of those people that's thriving, that's doing okay, great, spread that shit. I've seen how easy it is to get someone's social engagement system back online. Like today, I was in a shop just buying some lentils. I just sort of turned to the girl, how you doing? You all right? Is it weird behind that glass screen? Because they put up these glass screens, and you could see her sort of for a moment not know what to do, and because obviously people weren't really interacting in a connected way. They were just buying their things and leaving, is the sense I had. And she just sort of went, oh, it was like, thanks for asking. I'm a human being too. It's nice to meet you. Was the kind of, it was like a lot of attention just disappeared like straight away with that little one or two words to her. That it's just normal daily banter, but I could see it meant a lot to her. And I've had a few interactions like that now. There's a homeless guy I always nod to in the park as I walk around the park. And he sits there drinking whatever he's drinking and I'm coaching someone. I have to say, he probably looks happier than me most days. But I always give him a little nod and he nods back to me. And it's just a little social acknowledgement of other human beings. And I think that's powerful at the moment.
It is.
We are.
There's also cultivating some observer of all these pieces of fragments or whatever that are parts of ourselves, the cultivation of that part that can hold space for the rest, especially for I like to call it the compost layer, the part that can hold space for us to go deeper into the mess and just go further down into the compost layer of the mess, like just letting it go beyond shame, beyond judgment, down. But that requires a lot of cultivation of what you're saying, Stephen, is like that orienting. So first orienting out, then orienting in, and then cultivating that over and over again so that we have this capacity to at least get out of our judgment or shame or free state and notice it, tracking it. So then it's possible to even drop into that compost, drop down. To me, it's beyond the gut. It's further down in the pelvic floor and further down into that, the organs that are really taking care that we discard what we don't need. And so going into that level requires a lot of tracking, constantly being in that observer position and sensing position, noticing visuals like you're sensing, all this map.
Okay, guys, I'm really sorry, but we're almost out of time. Like, I do need to end on the hour. Lots of juicy stuff here. You're all on my Facebook thread if you want to swap details. For listeners out there, I think I could speak for all of us by saying we wish you well. And if you've got difficult stuff going on, we hope, at least something here was of use to you. Maybe like one website for each of you. I know you all do lots of different things, but in case people want to sort of find out more about your particular approach, Ilan, what's your main website?
I want to name my YouTube channel.
Okay.
Ilan Stephani.
Ilan Stephani,
Yeah.
Stephan for November I. Yeah. Okay, Magdalena.
It's my name.com, MagdalenaWeinstein.com. I'm also active in Instagram as Magdalena Weinstein.
Got it. Thank you, Steve.
Oh, I'm going to check out all of those. We're organicintelligence.org.
Okay, I have to write these down on my phone. Okay, so maybe a closing nugget of wisdom on trauma and COVID from each of you. Just like a sentence for people to take away as a little pearl. Ilan.
I want to mention the shaking again as a daily somatic prayer and a global good habit.
And standing in that pile of compost, it's going to give seeds, it's going to give fruits, it's going to grow into something else. And we don't know what it is, but that's exciting to me. So picking on that excitement of whatever is growing under our feet.
Thank you, Steve.
I would just say, just hearing you all, it just opens my heart, and it reminds me that with this virus, we will all share in this, and beneath it all, we are all together, and we are all one. We are all in the same big boat of our ship, Mother Earth. So thank you for joining in that.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed this. It's been lots of fun. I thought I was sick of Zoom. Maybe I'm not sick of Zoom, but this has just felt engaging and lively, and really nice meeting of people. So thank you all so much for your time. No doubt you're all at the Embodiment Conference, so I will be seeing you there very likely before online in some format. So thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you soon.
some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Embodiment Podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodiedyfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If you're, most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedyfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedyfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator Course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you.